By the mid-2000s, BioWare were one of the most established RPG developers in the West. Notable examples of their talent include Jade Empire, Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, and Knights of the Old Republic, which is considered to be one of the greatest games to carry the Star Wars name. But instead of taking the chance to make a sequel, the Canadian developer wanted even more creative control, so they went straight to work on a brand new IP. The popularity of other genres like shooters and MMORPGs influenced BioWare to tackle both despite minimal experience. One of them was Mass Effect. It took 3 years for BioWare to develop with numerous delays, spending most of their time designing the universe and setting up the programming template. So when they eventually went to make the sequels, they wouldn't take as long. Designed to be a trilogy in advance, director Casey Hudson wanted a real-time action game combined with the advantages of the RPG genre. He and his team wanted to prove that shooter games can have detailed plots and believable characters with the gameplay and variety to boot. Mass Effect was released for the Xbox 360 on November 2007. As you all know, the 10th anniversary of this game and the franchise just went past, and has now become a pop culture icon with its own comic books, spin-offs, and standalone title. So let's look back at why this was so beloved early into the 7th generation. Set over a century and a half from now, humanity's continued space exploration leads to the discovery of Prothean and mass relay technology, and set eyes on expansion beyond the solar system. However, they enter a conflict with an alien race called the Turians after breaking Citadel Council rules, unknown to the humans. After both species engaged in a 3-month conflict known as the First Contact War, the Citadel Council quickly broker a peace. Humanity are given an embassy on the Citadel and continue their expansion across the galaxy. These events lead to the beginning of the game. In 2183, 25 years after humanity found their first piece of Prothean tech, another is found on a human colony on Eden Prime, and Commander Shepard is tasked with retrieving the tech to the Alliance. But before he or she can do that, a synthetic race called the Geth invade the colony.
This mission just got a lot more complicated.
It turns out they're under the orders of Saren Arterius, a rogue council spectre who plans to use the beacon as a key to finding the conduit, and bring back an ancient race called the Reapers, who arrive every 50,000 years to wipe out all galactic civilization. He reaches the beacon first, activates it himself, and sets explosive charges all over the colony, but Commander Shepard fights through the Geth, disables the charges, and secures the active Prothean beacon. But after accidentally getting too close, visions of war and death are burned into his or her mind.
I'm not sure what I saw. Death, destruction, nothing's really clear.
Commander Shepard becomes suspected by the Citadel Council, and leads a crew to stop Saren along with his ally Matriarch Benezia and their plans to bring back the Reapers. To give you an idea of just how story-driven Mass Effect is, literally the first 15 minutes of this game is cutscenes and interactive dialogue. Being an RPG where story is king, it's essential that you understand what's going on. I know there's more to what I just said, I just don't want to give away too much.
You can't possibly understand what's really at stake.
The idea of humanity being new to the full galactic civilization is a very clever idea. There are lots of different alien species trying to fit in, and you have this giant station called the Citadel where high-level figures and politicians reside trying to keep the galaxy balanced. Well, when I say trying, I mean denying that anything's wrong is their neutral switch. There's so much put into the story it makes your head spin, and every time I play it, I always find something new. The first game kind of represents how the galaxy operates. Humanity are trying to fit in, then a rogue spectre threatens to unleash an alien race that can wipe out everything. But what drives the narrative is the characters, more specifically your crew.
This ship feels so empty. It's like half the crew is missing.
Not only do they have their own abilities, but their own backstories and beliefs. Each member of the squad is extremely likable, and there's enough character development for them to have their own game, especially Garrus Vakarian.
Yeah. I don't think I ever met anyone like you, Commander.
You even have the option to pursue a romantic relationship, though I wish Garrus and Tully were options too, which they would end up being in Mass Effect 2.
You intrigue me, Shepard.
The voice acting to go along with the characters is also really good. You have to respect the actors for taking on an RPG like Mass Effect, as it supposedly has tens of thousands of dialogue and none of it is too cheesy.
I won't let you keep your thralls. Release them, now!
But then it needs to be really good because dialogue option is one of the most important aspects of the series as a whole. Creating a sense of responsibility when making decisions was one of BioWare's most important ideas during development. Almost every time you enter a cutscene, a conversation wheel appears allowing you to choose the dialogue for Shepard. Like Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, you have a different way of approaching characters and making decisions based on the level of morality. However, instead of options that are basically good or evil, they wanted to make the choices grey, as if there's no right or wrong decision. However, because Paragon and Renegade decisions are always there, it's just as black and white as Knights of the Old Republic. Only this time you have a choice of being the noble hero or the sole reason why the galaxy hates humans.
We don't have time to deal with this idiot. Charge!
Having a strong level of Paragon or Renegade points affects your chances at succeeding in certain conversations, so choose your morality early, because in the end, your decisions will alter how humanity is perceived by the rest of the galaxy.
Alright, Shepard. You've made your point. I don't like this, but I trust you enough to follow your lead.
There'll be moments when you feel the need to skip certain dialogue because there can be too much in one conversation, even by RPG standards. But that's how the genre works, you need to dissect a lot right at the beginning. At least it's better to hear stories from your crew than some codex. Mass Effect was planned to be a trilogy in mind, and the first one is only the face of things to come.
Well said, Commander. Captain would be proud.
The captain gave up everything so I could have this chance. We can't fail.
Yes, ma'am.
Because Mass Effect was planned to be a trilogy in mind, BioWare spent most of their development process trying to set up the programming basis so when they eventually went to make the sequels, they wouldn't take as long. The visions of the beacon, the camera angles of the action scenes, and so many different planets. It certainly has the scope and cinematic experience it needs to keep you engaged.
They say it's a paradise.
Yes, a paradise.
And the soundtrack, it still gives me goosebumps to this day. Composed by Jack Wall and Sam Hulick, I hope I pronounced that correctly, I could listen to it all day long. According to Jack Wall and Casey Hudson, it's meant to be based on the science fiction movies between the late 70s and early 80s. I wish the elevator music was the Vigil/main menu theme, then all would be forgiven, because whenever you enter an elevator on the Citadel, it takes at least 30 seconds to reach the next level.
How you holding up, Lieutenant?
Not too bad. No headaches worth mentioning lately. Maybe I'm getting used to the strain.
From a technical perspective, it's flawed in some areas. The most obvious is the texture pop-up, which is in full force in the final hour of gameplay. I'm surprised it wasn't fixed in the PlayStation 3 version 5 years after the Xbox 360 release. The game can also occasionally freeze, cutscenes can't be skipped, it can take as long as 20 minutes just to autosave, so save manually every 5 minutes. And finally, okay, this only happened once, but there was one quest I completed, I went to the Normandy, and it just completely skipped the conversation in the comm room. Shame really, because I missed out on the opportunity to cut off the council.
I don't need this. Communications cut, Commander.
If BioWare ever remaster the trilogy for the 8th generation, they'll want to make sure to clean up some of these issues, because they're present despite installing all possible updates. As leader of the crew, you travel throughout the galaxy with the Normandy using the mass relays, with plenty of missions and assignments to complete that either move the story further or improve you and your crew's stats. Even though there are over 100 planets to explore on the galaxy map, you can only set foot on one per system, which I'll get to in a minute. There are only 5 planets and 1 citadel fully developed specifically for the story. But at least they're huge, the designs are unique, and take between 2 to 4 hours to complete everything. And then there are the optional missions that have nothing to do with Saren, which are triggered through conversation or just roaming closer to uncharted space. And to say they're repetitive is an understatement. Literally every assignment that requires traveling to another planet is exactly the same. Be it dropped off by the Normandy with the Mako, there might be one or more outposts present which are in the form of a cave, storage base, or underground facility. The only things that change are the planet texture, elevation, and cutscenes towards the end. That's what happens when you rush development. You'll find obvious examples of shortcut programming. and the Mako, which is used primarily for these assignments. Firstly, you accelerate, reverse, and steer with the analog stick, on the console version anyway. The weapons are completely inaccurate if you're on an angle, and the time it takes to bring the shield back to full power, I would have beaten the game by then. The Mako is rubbish. Sure, the enemies are weak when using it, it's impossible to get stuck upside down, and super glue is constantly being sprayed onto the wheels. Yes, I'm trying to find the silver lining, but the way it controls, honestly, if you could just use the trigger buttons for acceleration and braking, kind of like the Grand Theft Auto games from the 7th generation and beyond, the Mako would never have been the designated scapegoat for bad controls in an otherwise fantastic game. Overall, the assignments give you better experience points, better weapons, and additional unique dialogue to the sequels if you import your save file. However, the weapons, items, and upgrades only get better the longer you play it, not because of specific assignments apart from 1 or 2 exceptions. And I was able to beat Mass Effect completing only the story missions. Only do them if you're highly invested in the story, which I mentioned before you're very likely to be. Preparing yourself for a harder difficulty because you can restart with your stats remaining, I'll get to that in a moment, and or if you're trying to 100% complete it. But whatever you choose to do, the leader you create will alter the way you try to save the galaxy. Right after the moment you start a new game, you're taken to the character creator where you can construct Commander Shepard's profile based on first name, looks, gender, backstory, and military specialization. The facial options are lacking, and because these faces are synonymous with the Mass Effect franchise, I'll always stick with them. But everything else has a major effect with morality and the way you enter combat. I've already gone over how the morality system works, but one thing I didn't mention is that the backstory you choose will give you a small amount of either Paragon or Renegade points, which is an easy way of picking between the two from the start. You have a choice of 6 military specializations which are shuffled on the 3 classes Combat, Biotic, and Tech. A certain specialization gives you distinct advantages and talent powers. To give you an idea of just how rubbish I am at RPGs, I didn't even realize the effectiveness of these talents until I reached the final boss. The specialization you select will also affect what you can use your stats on, which you'll need to increase to get anywhere in Mass Effect. To level up, you gain experience through battles, completing missions, and discovering information, which can also come from crew conversations. Maximum level is 60. Speaking of the crew, they also have their own individual attributes, and each member is different from the other. Storage containers are scattered all over the galaxy, including weapons, armor, and upgrades. Different weapons include assault rifles, sniper rifles, shotguns, and pistols. The class you choose affects what weapons you can use proficiently, and upgrades can improve them. The inventory selection in the first Mass Effect has always been a pet peeve of mine. I understand you have to keep updating your crew members' equipment to make it through the game, and variety is always a good thing, but it can be very tedious scrolling through so many weapons, especially if being a military specialization other than soldier makes you capably inept with a couple of these weapon types. And because you can only carry a maximum of 150 items including upgrades, I guarantee you'll reach that limit at some point during gameplay. In fact, cleaning up your inventory is particularly monotonous, and possibly the only thing worse than the Mako, because whenever you scroll down to delete one of your armor or ammo upgrades, which make up for more than half the total inventory I might add, say you want to get rid of the weaker upgrades to make way for the better ones because you've reached the 150 item limit. As you can see, it goes back to the top of the list and you have to keep scrolling back down to delete one at a time. Unbelievable. So check your inventory frequently to save time. To access everything I just mentioned in game, you pause it by holding one of the shoulder buttons and select what you want. But despite this, the combat plays out in real time. It's easy to say that your weapon is almost never accurate or they overheat too quickly, but it's an RPG with plenty of options, and the more you play, the better equipment you earn. So I'm fine with this, and because guns have an overheat system, you never have to worry about losing ammo. The only thing about the combat I don't like is the sprint meter that goes down just after 2 or 3 seconds. It takes 20 seconds to fill it back up, and if you're not in combat, you can't sprint at all, which makes moving around a large area more boring than it should be. But otherwise, for a developer who had made only one shooter up to that point, while combining it with RPG elements, It's a decent effort looking back, and they definitely improved on it in the sequels. It's rough around the edges, yes, but there are hardly any moments where the controls let you down. On foot at least. It's a shame that driving the Mako off a cliff won't do anything. You hear me, Alliance? I don't like using it. Because the Geth are the enemies you attack 80% of the time, they attack the same way and the optional assignments are literally the same thing with a different interaction or cutscene at the end, the gameplay feels a lot more repetitive than I remember. It's odd because I never get bored playing Mass Effect. I played it enough to become used to the controls, and the story and characters more than make up for it. It'll motivate you to tackle through the gameplay just to see what happens next. You'll probably need to play it a second time to truly comprehend everything, at least I needed to anyway, because the actions you take will affect future events in the sequels via save file transfer. It's also pretty short for an RPG. Even despite having moments where there's too much dialogue in one conversation, it takes around 15 hours to beat. You can get closer to 20 if you do the assignments, but only if you're interested. Just make sure you've completed as many of the assignments as you can, because once you reach the ending credits, you can't continue and finish them off. You'll go straight to the main menu. However, you can start again with your stats remaining, which is useful on the harder difficulty options and completing achievements. A year after Mass Effect was released, BioWare was purchased by Electronic Arts, released a port for the PC and another for the PlayStation 3 in 2012, to coincide with the release of the Mass Effect trilogy. If you've never played it before and plan on doing so, I recommend getting the compilation because value for money and it's available on 3 different platforms. But whatever one you choose, the different military specializations, weapons, character relationships, tough decisions, gigantic universe, and strong narrative all create a memorable journey with tons of replay value which only increases in the sequels. Yes, it's starting to show its age from a gameplay perspective, but it's been over a decade. Most video games just age because developers continue to evolve. Besides, BioWare would use the feedback from critics and fans to their advantage and respond with one of the greatest video game trilogies of all time.